Namaste, respected scholars and esteemed colleagues. I am Pragya Pyasi. Today I am going to present my paper titled Authority, Freedom and Improvisation, Pandit Sanjoy Bandopadhyay's contemporary re-articulation of guru-shiShya pedagogy. This study is part of my ongoing autoethnographic research where I examine the lived experience of learning within the guru-shiShya parampara, particularly through the improvisation-based pedagogy of Pandit Sanjoy Bandopadhyay. Traditionally, the guru-shishya system has often been perceived as hierarchical, authority-driven, and restrictive in terms of learners' autonomy. However, my research seeks to challenge this perception by examining how authority and freedom are not opposites but are dynamically negotiated within the pedagogical process. I adopted a qualitative and interpretive approach using analytical autoethnography as my primary method. At the outset of training, authority undeniably rests with the guru. The guru determines what is musically appropriate, how a raga should unfold, and what constitutes aesthetic values. At this stage, the disciple primarily imitates, repeats, and absorbs what is being taught. Aesthetic judgment is therefore not independent. It is mediated through the Guru's sensibility. However, this is not a static condition. Through continuous engagement, listening, repetition, and exposure, a gradual but significant shift begins to take place. The disciple starts moving from imitation to perception, perception to sensitivity, and sensitivity to judgment. I would like to illustrate this through a personal learning experience. While learning Raga Rageshri, during an alap session, I struggled with a particular phrase. The phrase concluded on Mandra Saptak Madhyam, and my Guruji repeatedly pointed out that although I was replicating the notes correctly, the impact was not being created. I attempted it again and again, almost 30 to 40 times. Each time I was stopped. I was not missing general accuracy, but missing the aesthetic effect. At that moment, my Guruji emphasized something very crucial, that I needed to listen more deeply, not just to the notes, but to the trajectory of the phrase, the resonance of the mantra madhyam, and the continuity of its after effect. When I finally rendered the phrase with that sustained resonance, the correction stopped. That moment was not about learning a phrase, it was about learning how to listen while you play. This brings me to an important pedagogical principle articulated by my Guruji. He often says, nothing is inherently good or bad. It depends on your exposure and your understanding. This statement fundamentally shifts the idea of aesthetic judgment from being absolute to being experiential and evolving. Once aesthetic judgment is seen as something that develops through experience, the pedagogical process begins to open up in new ways. The Guru begins to offer multiple musical possibilities, demonstrate alternative phraseologies, and then ask the disciple, which one do you feel is better? The question is pedagogically transformative because At that moment, the Guru does not impose judgment but invites the disciple to exercise it. Hence, authority begins to shift, not abruptly, but organically, from Guru centered control to disciple centered awareness. This is what I interpret as guided autonomy. At this stage, I would like to share a brief audio excerpt from my learning process in Rag Marwa. In this recording, my Guru presents certain tans, and my response is not an exact imitation of those phrases. Instead, I attempted to recreate a similar aesthetic impact, adding different swara combinations. This moment is significant because it reflects a clear shift in the pedagogical process. Earlier, my focus was to reproduce the phrases exactly as taught. However, here the emphasis moves towards understanding the aesthetic intent, internalizing the musical effect, and then expressing it through my own phrasing. In this sense, the authority over aesthetic judgment is no longer entirely with the Guru. It begins to reside within my own listening, perception, and decision making. The Guru's role here is not to prescribe the exact form, but to shape my ability to discern, interpret, and create. So, what you will hear is not imitation, but an attempt at aesthetic equivalence, where the impact is retained even as the structure varies. I will now play the recording. Another significant aspect of this pedagogy is the role of silence. There are moments when the Guru does not interrupt, does not correct, does not intervene. The silence is not absence, it is intentional pedagogy. It compels the disciple listen more attentively, assess their own musical output, and make aesthetic decisions independently. In this scene, silence becomes a catalyst for internalization. So, the ultimate objective of this pedagogical approach is very clear. It is not to produce replicas of the Guru, but to nurture independent musical individuals. In fact, my Guru explicitly discourages blind imitation, even of his own style. Therefore, I argue that within this improvisation based pedagogy, authority is not diminished but reconfigured. Freedom is not given abruptly but cultivated gradually. An aesthetic judgment is not taught directly but emerges as a byproduct of immersive practice. To conclude, the guru-shishya relationship, as experienced in this context, is not rigidly hierarchical. Rather, it is fluid, evolving structure where authority enables learning, freedom enables expression, and improvisation becomes the bridge between the two. I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to my Guruji, Pandit Sanjoy Bandopadhyay. I also sincerely thank the organizers, for providing me with this opportunity to present my research.